Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. How much of how you work, your decisions, your priorities, your judgment calls, actually lives anywhere outside your own head? Not the strategy, not the vision, the operating detail. How you decide what's urgent, what you escalate, how you like to walk into a meeting. If you're like most executives, the honest answer is barely any of it. It lives in your head and it gets transmitted imperfectly to the person closest to you, typically your EA or COS, who spends years essentially trying to figure out how you think. That system, the one governing how you work, has a name. It's called executive operations. And in this video, I want to define it properly because I think it's going to be one of the most important functions in any scaling company. So let's start with the obvious question. Isn't this just operations? Well, no. Well, at least not quite. When we say operations, we usually mean the business function, processes, people, systems, how work moves through the company at large. Executive operations is a bit narrower. It's about you, specifically your time, your attention, your decisions, your communication, your relationships, how you follow through, and increasingly, the knowledge that surrounds all of it. If operations asks, how does the company work? Executive operations asks, how do you work? And how do we design that so it makes the company work better? Now, here's something I want to be very direct about, because you might hear executive operations and assume I'm talking about your EA's job description. I'm not. It isn't a better title for your assistant. It's a system that belongs to you. The traditional model of executive support sounds like, tell me what you need and I'll get it done. Someone reacts to you. Executive operations is a different relationship entirely. We understand how you operate, what the organization needs for you, and we've designed the system around you so your attention goes where it actually has leverage. That system is yours. You define the outcomes, the standards, and the decisions that belong to you. Someone else may run parts of it, but they shouldn't have to reverse engineer it. It usually gets executed by an EA, a chief of staff, sometimes a small team, increasingly by AI. But the design, the standards, the judgment about what deserves your attention, that's yours. Delegating the execution isn't the same as it being someone else's function. Keep that distinction in mind. It's going to matter for everything I walk you through next. When a company is small, this isn't usually a problem. The founder knows everyone. They're in every conversation. They can make decisions quickly because they have most of the context. Someone can walk into their office or send a WhatsApp message and get an answer. It's messy, but it works. Until it doesn't. The company grows, there are more people, more customers, more stakeholders, more decisions, more meetings, more information, and suddenly the informal system that worked at 10 people doesn't quite work at 50. The founder is still being asked to approve things, still being copied on everything, still making decisions that someone else could probably make, still carrying information that exists nowhere else. And the really dangerous part, the company can actually become more dependent on the founder as it gets bigger. That's the paradox. You hire more people to create capacity, but if the underlying decision flow and operating system don't change, you simply create more things that eventually need to come back to the executive. The business gets bigger, the team gets bigger, but the bottleneck stays the same size. And that's what I've been talking about throughout this series. The calendar problem, the delegation problem, the decision problem, the meeting problem. They're not really separate problems. They're symptoms of the same thing. The executive system hasn't evolved at the same pace as the company. So let's make this practical. What actually sits inside your executive operations? I think about it in 5 areas. The first is attention. You don't need more things put into your calendar. You need the right things protecting it, which means you need clarity on what deserves your attention, what can be delegated, what can happen asynchronously, and what should never have reached you in the first place. That's why calendar management, done well, isn't administrative. It's leverage management. You're deciding where one of the organization's most expensive resources, your attention, gets spent. Now, someone else might hold the calendar, but the standard for what belongs on it is a decision only you can actually own. That's why I said in the earlier calendar video, just block time for deep work isn't enough. You need a system for deciding what deserves the time in the first place. The second is decision flow. Your executive operations system helps make sure that decisions don't just happen, they move. What's the decision? Who owns it? What information do you actually need? What can be decided without you? What needs escalation? What happens after the decision? Because a decision that sits in someone's inbox for 3 days isn't really a decision. And a decision that gets made but isn't communicated or followed through isn't really execution. Executive operations closes that loop. Third, communication. Now, this is not simply sending emails. I'm talking about translating your intent into communication, communication that other people can actually act on. Preparing you for important conversations, making sure the right context is available before a meeting, capturing commitments, tracking follow through, knowing what needs to be said to whom, when, and in what format. One of the things I've seen repeatedly is that the best executive support isn't about being a better note taker for you. It's about someone getting good enough at anticipating what you need next, that it starts to feel like your own judgment, just one step ahead of you. The fourth is knowledge. This one is particularly important. A lot of what makes you effective is tacit. How you make decisions, what you care about, what you don't care about, which relationships are strategically important, what urgent actually means to you, how you like meetings prepared, how you communicate, when you want options versus when you want a recommendation. Often, all that knowledge lives in someone's head. If your EA leaves, some of that knowledge leaves. If a new EA joins, they have to spend months rebuilding it. If you're unavailable, everyone suddenly discovers how much context was never documented. And this is not a people problem. It's an institutional memory problem. And this is one of the reasons I built Executive Playbook, to turn that invisible knowledge into something that can actually be captured, used, and retained by you and your organization. And the fifth is the one underneath all of the others, leverage. The question isn't, how can I help the executive get more done? It's, how can we increase the amount of organizational impact created by the executive's attention? And that's a very different question, because not all executive work has equal value. A CEO spending 45 minutes deciding on a strategic partnership is very different from spending 45 minutes approving something that someone else could have handled. The goal isn't to make you more efficient at doing everything. The goal is to make sure you're spending your time on the things that actually require you. That's executive leverage. One more thing worth naming before I move on. Because you now know this system belongs to you, it should be clear why an EA or chief of staff executing executive operations isn't the same as it being their job. They're not just managing your workload. They're helping manage the interface between you and the organization, running a system whose design is yours, whose standards are yours, and whose value shows up in how much of your own attention you get back. That's why this becomes more valuable, not less, the bigger the company gets. There's another reason I think executive operations is going to become more important. AI. We're entering a world where an increasing amount of execution can be automated or augmented. AI can summarize the meeting, draft the email, build the first version of the brief, pull together the information, create the follow-up list. But AI doesn't automatically know what matters. It doesn't automatically know what you should care about. It doesn't know which decision is strategically sensitive. It doesn't know which stakeholder relationship needs a human touch. And it certainly doesn't fix a broken operating system. In fact, if your workflows are already chaotic, AI can simply make the chaos faster. That's why I keep coming back to this idea. You can't layer AI onto chaos and expect better execution. The companies that get the most from AI will be the ones that understand their workflows and decision structures enough to know where AI belongs and where humans need to stay in the loop. Executive operations sits right at that intersection. And this is really the core of everything I've been talking about on this channel. If you've watched the previous videos, we talked about why founders become bottlenecks, why some decisions should stop reaching you, why your calendar needs to be designed, not inherited, why delegation fails when you transfer tasks instead of ownership, why more meetings don't necessarily create more alignment. All of those are really questions about one thing. How does the organization use its executive capacity? That's what executive operations is about. It's about creating the systems, structures, and ways of working that allow you to operate at a level the organization actually needs from you. And importantly, it isn't about making you more indispensable. The opposite. The goal is to make the organization less dependent on you for things that don't require your judgment, while making your contribution more valuable than it ever was. That's leverage. So why have you probably never heard the term executive operations before? Because the work has existed for a long time. It just hasn't had a name. It's been distributed across executive assistants, chief of staff, operations people, project managers, incredibly capable individuals who quietly become the connective tissue around a founder or CEO. But the system they've been executing was always yours to design. What's changing is that we're starting to recognize that this isn't just a collection of helpful tasks someone else handles for you. It's your function. And I think it deserves a system, a discipline, and eventually its own professional language. That's what I'm building here. And it's also why I built the Executive Playbook, a way to capture how you work, put your standards in the hands of the person supporting you, and turn all that invisible knowledge into something the organization can actually keep. If that's something you want to see, I've put the wait list below. And if you're an executive who's felt this, the sense that your operating system lives entirely in your own head, I'd especially love to hear from you, because I think we're at the beginning of a much bigger conversation about what it means to run yourself like a system, not just a schedule. Because the bigger your company gets, the less you can afford to have the way you operate live only in your head. If you found this useful, subscribe. In the next videos, we'll be talking a bit more about how you actually build this function inside a growing company. I'll see you there.